Okay, so let's see if this
Peaches.
is freed. Yeah, it moves. We don't want to go at it too hard front to back. Usually when I first try to get movement, I'll go side to side like this kind of motion. And I should just dig a little more because it's not quite freed. It's very close though. And so I'm going to plumb it, pack gravel around it, and then we'll go on and do the repair. I can also see that it might be leaning this way as well. So it should come this way a little, and see if the edges are actually cut parallel. They look pretty close. So it should go mainly forward, and as I mentioned earlier, forward and backward is structural. That's what really matters. And side to side is more cosmetic. A lot of time we'll do both if we're doing one, but the front to back is what's really important. We don't have to level this that much. So I'm going to just free this edge up. To answer the question, how deep?
Yeah.
It all depends on the stone. Actually, I just, right here, it just got wider. And so it's actually tooled down to here, and then it gets wider. The underground portion, sometimes we call the butt of the stone, that's the underground portion. A lot of time it's not really finished, and I can see it gets wider right here at the bottom. So that means that this stone was probably meant to be quite a bit higher. We could raise it as part of this project right now. Originally I wasn't looking to raise it, but we certainly could do that. It is an option.
Is there any reason that you're not digging from the back as well?
I don't need to dig the back because the stone has to come forward, and so it's a waste of time. In fact, that's a bad thing to do because the more we open the hole, the more unstable it will disturb soil. Generally, we want to minimize the disturbance to the soil in the surrounding area. So I'm going side to side. Now I can creep it up. So let me just get a little more of this loose, and I'll show you how we could raise this incrementally. This is pretty easy digging, which is really nice.
So where you were calling the butt, is that the boundary of what originally should have been below ground versus above ground?
Something like that, but it's not that defined exactly. So it just where they tooled it to, and it's we know that wasn't above, but it could have been below. So I mean, it's handmade, so it's not finished to the same tolerances. So there's a lot of variability. So now it's nice and loose.
Yeah.
I could actually remove it from the ground, but I'm not going to. That's just going to let a lot of sediment, a lot of the soil wash in. And so I'm going to try to work around this, just get a little more of the loose, try to minimize the amount of soil and maximize the gravel or harder material that gets underneath it. It will be a mix to some degree inherently, but it'll be primarily gravel. So I'm going to come on this side, and then I'm going to get some on this side, not too much, and actually a finer aggregate will work well for this kind of process. So what I can do now is go one way, and then I'll encourage some to get under with the spade shovel, and then I'll go the other way. It actually mostly dropped down, which is fine, but once I get it underneath, I'm going to rise it a little, raise it. I could also do this by removing it. I could also lift it out with a hoist if it was a bigger stone. So different sizes, different soil types are going to dictate different treatments. So that came up a bit now, you can see, started to rise. Now the gravel's getting underneath the whole stone. I can tell, I can feel it, I can see it disappearing in the hole. I'm trying to raise it a little because, so now if people wanted to see it, you can see where it's tooled to, and it gets rock pitch here, basically. And so they ran the way they finished the edge is by running a chisel through it. They stopped right here, and they let it run wild. They didn't tool the stone down there. It didn't matter. So you see on the historic stones that are handmade, the older ones, they're going to do a minimum amount of work. On a lot of the oldest bases, it'll be very rough on the bottom because they know it's going in the ground. As they had more mechanization, it was more like running it through saws, and so then it wouldn't have affected it. So like most of these marbles, even the underground portion is going to still be the same because they ran it through a saw like making a 2x4. Okay, so we're looking pretty good here now, and got this up to a reasonable elevation and levels right here. So first I'll check these sides right here. This shows a little low on this side. They're not always cut parallel, but these are because they're giving the same reading. If a stone doesn't have square edges, you can't put a level on the edge. Just for tool usage, this is plum. A plumb bob is like a string with a weight, shows you straight up and down vertical, and this is level, 90 degrees to plumb. And so when we're working with this, we're going to be working mostly with the vertical aspect, there's nothing really to level. If we had inscription here, we could actually put this along the inscription and we could level it that way also. Okay, so first I'm just gonna come a little higher on this side. And yeah, I could have dug a tiny bit in back also, but this will work out just fine, what I'm doing here. So, all right, so what I'm gonna do is just go this way a little and check it. Now the gravel's kind of driving itself in by itself because it's kind of like an hourglass effect, and sand will do that to a very high degree. Okay, so.
Better than gravel?
No, usually, I mean, I want a coarser material, but there's some situations where it's hard to get under something. You could do that and let it run itself under, and like an hourglass, but more often than not, a gravel is a better material. Okay, so we're pretty good there now. That's plum. We'll just jump to this side. They're pretty close both ways. And once again, at the risk of being redundant, the left and the right side are mostly cosmetic. Front to back is structural. So we're looking pretty good. Bigger buildups are going to do better with a coarser gravel. Smaller buildups or smaller spaces, a smaller gravel. If we have rocks, which we didn't in this digging, we could add some of the rocks as well.
He's bringing you something too.
Thank you. So I'm going to plumb the front. It's right, actually perfectly plumb right where it sits. These historic stones, the back tends to be inconsistent and sometimes not really fully finished. So really we're more concerned with the inscribed face of the stone and the cut edges, and the back is less significant. Much of the time we don't want to pay attention to that. It could taper a little on the back. So I'll just add some more of this here, a little more to the front, and then we'll move on, regrade it, and we could work on joining the stone. Okay, so it's looking a little better. Now I'll put some more of this in.
How much gravel do you add in around from the base up? About.
I mean, every stone is different, so it's kind of whatever it needs, because different depths below, grade. So, I mean, I'm just, gravel could go much higher, and as long as we allow about 4 inches for soil, but if we have limited amounts of gravel, we could use more soil at the end. So
But you want to keep the gravel 4 inches below the top?
well, you want to allow grass to grow. So you don't want to go too high with gravel. We don't want to bring that up to the surface, or we'll never get any grass. Or it won't be good grass. So that's looking pretty good there. Then we could, it's nice and solid now. I'm going to try to leave the grass out now and get the dirt in first. Once again, if there was rocks here at this juncture, if they weren't too big, you could put them in this hole. But if they're really big, you'd probably best to remove them. Obviously, we could also put this on a tarp. We could put it on a piece of plywood or something like that. You got gravel?
Bigger gravel, bigger
All right.
rocks.
Well, we could take a scoop since you got it and put it right here. Still got space for it. Scoop right here in front and one in back would be great. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good gravel to use for most of this work. That's like ideal. Coarser, and it's going to be better to work with. Thank you. That's good. That should do it for now, and we'll save that for the next one. What do you call this material here?
This is known as 3/4 dirty stone or Q-pack, quick pack. Use this for driveway bases.
Got it. That's a perfect material to do most of the work, but if we had to only raise something up about 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch, the chunks would be too big and the finer gravel would work better. So you can use different size aggregate with different amount of buildup, and that's the basic size of it. Should come back a tiny bit now. You're going to actually get a lot more compaction with a shovel, believe it or not, than a tamper.
I have a whole variety.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't push down
No,
there.
I'm just. I look good. I said, "Put it down with your shovel,
Okay.
it'll hold the lumber."
Okay, so we're really close. I'm just going to leave it right where it is. It just got a little bit off Plum when we packed it. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this up. The thing that'll actually create much better compaction is water. So if we spritz it with water, we're going to, all the fines, whether they be sand or crushed stone, are going to condense and compact. And so water is the thing that'll really make it pack together. It's pretty well compacted, but I'm just saying that will encourage it even more. And water helps compaction tremendously. Not with gravel, it has no effect. Gravel is all the coarse part of it, but with the fines, it will compact them together. So I'm going to weave the grass back in. I try to blend it in so it doesn't look like this was touched when we're done. So I try to have it come right back into the grade it was in and not berm it up higher, which a lot of people do. I don't like that. It doesn't look good, and it's not necessary. So I can just cut this in like this, kind of tenderize it a little. It still has the root structure underneath, so try to maintain most of the topsoil on the back of the turf. And even in hot weather, then it'll tend to be able to, outlive the summer conditions. Yeah, I found this one and I'm like, this is a quick fix, and it could have been a lot quicker, but it was not Plum. And so this is a whole different process, and this is the same process to reset a tablet stone. We're just doing it to one that's already fractured. That doesn't really affect anything. Should be the first step. If there's a base, same thing. We need to level the base first. You can't plumb a base really, as you generally level it because it builds off the base.
For something that isn't like a tablet but has like a foundation underneath it that's like kind of separate, when that's settled itself, would you like how would that generally?
We're going to do something with a base, and it's a completely different process, so it's not really. But we have to get the base level first, and so that's going to have some similarity, but it's going to be a very different process. So we have a big change in grade here, and so it's much lower back here, which is encouraging it to go backward. So if we regraded this low area, that would help it a lot. And in fact, that's one of the things that's not done much or very often in historic graveyards is regrading work. So it takes a lot of time and soil. When graveyards were active and they were digging by hand, I dug graves by hand, alone in situations when I had to. You end up with about 7 heaping wheelbarrows of dirt that you have to remove until the casket settles, which could take decades or longer in some situations. So you're always displacing earth, and so that you always have extra, and you always end up using it to regrade low areas. But after the graveyards become inactive, and in modern times when very few graves are dug by hand, then that no longer occurs usually, so you get a lot of uneven sinkholes. But the backstory is a lot of times stuff was being, in the historic days when they were hand digging, they were always filling in low spots because that was the quickest way to get rid of the dirt and also made the site better. So I use the excess to kind of build up the back, which will help reduce the likelihood it'll kind of settle backwards. So yeah.
So what if you have a gravestone and it's very crooked, but it's also like really sunk into the ground, right? What, you just keep dig till you get to, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like this one, okay, we had to dig a little bit to straighten it. Is the process much different? I'm trying to look around to see if there's an example of it.
If there's markers, big or small, if they're tablet stones, it's exactly the same as this stone, just a smaller or bigger version. We're going to clean the mating surface with a stainless steel brush. We're not going to use this on the face ever, but we're going to use this on the mating surfaces because it's going to clean it quicker and more effectively. And this is a mating surface, you're never going to see it again.
Are you using D2 or is that just water?
No, I am not using D2. I'm using water only. All I care about right now is the mating surface, not touching the rest of it. I could clean this quickly with a regular brush. I'll just hit this quickly because afterwards we're not going to clean anymore because we're going to have a fresh joint. So I'll just hit this quickly right now just to get the heavy stuff off and give it a rinse. And then I'm going to go on to the other side. So let me clean the other side first. So that's pretty well prepped right now. Okay, so then can take this paper towel here. And I did find a few. I need to get some more. These blue paper towels are way better than regular ones because they don't break down and they're much more absorbent. And you could actually, you know, put them out in the sun and dry them out and use them again. So we can just draw out the heavy moisture quickly this way.
All the auto parts stores have them. They're just called shop towels.
Yep. Yep. They're really good. There's different versions, but yes, they are much stronger. More similar to using like an historic cotton fabric or something. The modern rags are pretty useless because if they're synthetic, they don't absorb much. You can see the color changing almost spontaneously. That would be because the stone is still pretty warm from being out in the air, especially before the tent, and it's just drying really quickly, which is awesome because that's what we want. We want it to change to that lighter color. That means it's a dry surface. The way we're going to join this, it's going to be best to have a dry mating surface. So I'm going to go on and clean the other side, and then we'll talk about the adhesives. Like I said, I already dry fit these pieces, and it's a perfect fit and everything.
You're
right
just stronger than you thought you were.
Yeah, thanks. If this was granite or marble, it would have a little bit higher density. But stone varies, and from brownstone to brownstone, certainly there's a range. Brownstones are usually about 150, 55 pounds a cubic foot. Marble's probably a little denser, 160 maybe. And granites, lighter colors start around 180, 175, 180. But the darker colors tend to be heavier, and the blacks can approach 200 pounds a cubic foot. Just to give you a little frame of reference, lead is about 1,200 pounds a cubic foot, and lead is 600, excuse me, and gold is 1,200. Gold is 6 times heavier than a black granite.
Wow.
That's why when you see it in the movies and they have a little bar and it's so heavy, 6 times heavier than granite, or maybe 7 even, because that's with dark granite. That's looking pretty good. Yeah, the stuff that we used to install, a lot of Barry granite. That was the most popular back in the 80s and 90s before the kind of infiltration of the junk coming from overseas. And today it's a really international market, and there's a lot of substandard granite coming from China. So you got to watch out for the bad granite. They cheat a lot on the finishes. They make it look really super polished and shiny, but it doesn't have a good lasting finish on it. So if the monument company's still here.
I'm here. Yeah, I know exactly.
So those things, you got to be careful because, so we're out in the middle of the country, and the biggest problem out there is not biological growth for staining and cleaning, it's hard water staining. And there's a tremendous amount of hard water staining occurring because they use sprinklers. And what I'm saying is that the stones turn white from lime or calcium, you know, it's like lime scale, and it just builds up. And also in some areas from iron, and it gets like a rust colored. And so it's a big problem. Well, so usually if it's a domestic granite, meaning one of the older American-made granites, you can clean it with an acid-based solution quite effectively, pretty easily. And there's actually a system that Jason Church kind of developed in testing that uses this acid from a company. He found the best product was a company, Sparks, makes this brick and tile cleaner, and he tested a whole bunch of different cleaners, and then combining that with rubbing with a recycled glass block. I guess they use those also. They sell some of those at like grocery stores to clean. I'm not sure what they're cleaning with it, honestly, but
glass shower doors,
okay.
Typically.
Yeah. Normally that
Same
system
principle.
works great. We demonstrated it in Nebraska and Wyoming and Montana, and great success every time. I just want to warn you, on the dark modern black granites, if you put an acid on it, you could frost it and wreck the stone because it'll actually dissolve into the polish, which a historic stone won't do.
Sure, but
We're
we
going to
have
use Acapox 5010 to join this now, and it's going to be a 2-to-1 ratio. And so we're going to do 1 spoon of this and 2 spoons of the other tube. So the reason I like this adhesive is it has incredible durability. I've been using this company for over 2 decades with incredible results in the field. It's completely clear, has almost no discoloration, which means that if it squeezes out a tiny bit, it's not going to get an ugly yellow joint. Okay, so that's really important. And also we can use it in other ways. In fact, this adhesive is a popular one to use to fix stone if you ever mess up the lettering, like a monument company in modern times. And what you can do is add a granite dust to it, and then you can do a repair with it. And so it has versatile options. Also, I've been doing a lot of infill with it, in addition to using it in this way, and we can talk about that. We can also color it if we want to, and on a stone like this we could put a brown color in, and I'm not saying we need to do that, but there is, this box is getting a little shattered. This is a pigment kit that has 8 colors, but we also sell these pigments individually, and the most popular ones that I use is black or white, and these are paste pigments, and so they mix into this epoxy effortlessly, and they won't affect the texture or the strength, and so they're designed to go with it.
Not a powder, so it's easy.
They're all paste.
Right.
And so a powder will change the viscosity
Which will change everything.
a little bit. And so we're going to mix this up now, the 2 components. I just pushed 1 spoon off of the other, and I'm going to mix this up.
Those products are available through you?
So we sell every product I use, literally almost everything with me. We don't sell gravel because you can get it locally. We don't sell 2x4s, but pretty much everything else. Well, there's different sizes. This is the most popular size for lower use applications. It also comes in a big can that's like a contractor size. We have a lot of adhesives. This is an expensive adhesive, but it is, because it's clear and it has certain performance characteristics, that's why I use it for this application. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this to the stone. It dried quite nicely, the color changed, and so I'm not even going to mess around with the tint. Sometime I move the tent so it can get the sun, so it could expedite the drying, especially in cooler weather. I'm just going to go down the middle.
How long does that take to set up?
Like all epoxies, it's temperature sensitive, and so there would be 2 characteristics, which one would be working time, one would be what's called curing time, which would be basically what you're saying, set up or harden. So in this kind of temperature we're in right now, working time is probably shortened a little because it's a hot day, so it's probably only about maybe 15 or 20 minutes working time. I wouldn't want to push it too much longer. Cure time, and this is probably somewhere in the range of an hour, approximately, in this temperature. Just going to set this up. I'm going to run it down the middle, and then I'm going to work it toward the side. I find that you can just do this with plastic spoons and paper plates. It's pretty primitive. I mean, I have all kinds of trowels and stuff, but for this specific job, this seems to work out just fine. These are inexpensive, and I have found that all plastic spoons are not created equal. In fact, there's a big variation between quality, and after doing a lot of market research on the subject, Dixie Company wins out hands down. But I'm just telling you that their spoons are way better. Also, they are temperature sensitive, so if you're doing this in like 50-degree weather, the epoxy will harden, but it takes a long time, and as long as it doesn't go below freezing and crystallize, it will achieve the same strength eventually, but occasionally in chilly weather it could take 24 hours to do what it takes in an hour or 2 in warmer weather, and so you have to be more patient. But in colder weather, the plastic spoons just snap, and they just break really easily.
Are you running the epoxy all the way to the edge?
You can come look. I'm actually keeping it set back a little so I minimize squeeze out, and I'm avoiding having any big kind of buildups close to the edge. If it squeezes out a little, that's expected, but we're trying to just minimize the squeeze out. So we're pretty good all around now.
So about 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch or what?
Yeah, about 1/8 of an inch or so.
1/8 of an inch is fine.
Probably 1/16 isn't much, probably a little more than that.
Okay.
And so then if there's too much, we can also remove a little like this if I want to, and just take a little back. But it looks pretty good. You don't need that much, but you want a good amount so it bonds well. And so that actually what we're talking about here is how they connect. That has to do with the level of erosion on the stone. If you're joining a marble that's weathered and the edges are rounded, then a thicker epoxy is sometimes better because it has more what they call gap bridging ability, and this is better for really tight joints.
If there's a chunk missing, you have to
That's-
some kind of filler then? You know what I mean? Like if part of that bottom edge is broken?
We would do that after, and there's different ways we could do infill work, and it all depends on the particular stone and situation. One way that I've been doing it a lot for marble is I've actually been I can show you actually an example. We can mix some of the same epoxy or use a little bit of leftover if we have any.
But that stuff is strong enough where you wouldn't have to pin that?
Correct. I would never drill and pin a brownstone because it's gonna, it wants to crack, it wants to split. Thank you. And so it pretty much just joined immediately together, almost seamlessly. Now a little lateral motion like this, so you can see I got a little bit of squeeze out, okay, just a tiny bit. And there's a little more. And a little more. Okay, that's fine. I made it seat itself really tightly, and so in the front you can see where it squeezed out. Couple different things you can do. You can leave it alone, or you can remove it now carefully, but we don't want to smear it, and so I'll show you how we can remove it easily. And again, it will remain clear, but we don't want to smear it because it'll create like a sheen. And so I can take a little tool like this would be ideal. And this is an ornamental tool, and
The other side of the room, please.
we also sell these. These are really nice. Sometimes they call these Italian plaster tools, ornamental tools. They're really thin, they're really flexible. We have a few different styles of these. So if I could use a lot of different tools, but this way I could have more control over it. I could use either side really to do this, and I could just remove a little bit at a time that way and keep it neat so I'm not smearing it. So I used a little more than I needed, but that's fine. It makes a good demonstration to remove the excess, not a big deal. So what I'm doing is just removing it as I go. I think I like this side more. And I'm just gonna take a little bit as I go, so I'm not smearing most of it, I'm just lifting most of it off. The other way we could do this is just leave this alone, wait about 20 minutes or half hour, and it'll get pretty hard, but not so hard it's still like completely hardened, and you could just go right through it and just trim it right off smooth, and it'd be pretty easy to do. If you wait, or like if it's overnight and you come back tomorrow, then it's going to be like rock hard. You'd have to take like a sharp chisel and just carefully tap it off. And if you do that, it might tear a tiny bit of stone, and so that's not ideal, but it works pretty well as long as you're careful. So I'm just going to clean this up a little.
Do you have to do anything to seal, like along this edge then? Like that's still open? Or do you not worry about that?
It all depends, but that's not much there. Right now it shows that it actually is off by about, well, it looks like it should come this way a tiny bit. There it is. That's all there is. That's like a perfect joint. Doesn't even, I can see the way the edge is lining up. It's like perfect right
I
now.
didn't know if you needed to seal that crack up at all too.
There,
to
it's,
prevent water.
it's already filled.
Okay.
That's a common kind of partially a misconception, because when it gets wet, the entire stone gets wet anyway.
Okay.
So like cracks are, unless it's an open crack and water's flowing in, it's really not significant. Like the stone, like especially a sandstone, is like a wick. So the whole stone, it gets wet like a sponge. And so when it gets wet, it all gets wet. And so, you know, you can't really, you don't want to seal it because that'll trap moisture. So there is such a thing as a breathable water repellent. And we kind of touched on that earlier. So, I mean, this is joined up so perfectly. If the pieces are perfectly mated and it didn't break that long ago, sometime if the stone is more deteriorated, it shatters and there's a lot of loss, but sometimes it's just like a clean break like this. And if it's a clean break like this, I mean, we could have gotten away with without even doing any prep, and it still would have joined because the surfaces were so, you know, smooth. I mean, there wasn't that much soiling on it or anything, but you know, in leveling it and doing the whole process, it's going to be a much better job.
So what if it's not a perfect joint?
You just join it and then you do infill after.
Okay.
So
With
you
more
just
of the same epoxy?
we can add aggregate to it, like with marble we can add marble sand. With sandstone we could add a fine sand and make an infill material. So we can use these clamps and just little blocks like this, and we could use like 1x2 or 1x3 or other material, but I find these work out well. And the stone is not completely flat on the back, but it's close. The front is flat.
Keep it from blowing in the wind.
And so this is how you'd clamp it normally, just like this. And we could do both sides if necessary. And this will keep it aligned and safe and strong until the epoxy cures. And that's all there is to it. Any questions about this process?
How long the clamp stay on?
Until it hardens. We don't, and this will just self-support, so it doesn't really matter. In this temperature, like I said, probably an hour, especially if the tent isn't over it, approximately an hour just for it to be totally cured. It'll go through some phase changes, kind of, because it'll kind of start to gel up a lot, like I said, in probably 15 or 20 minutes, and that's when you could just scrape it, cut it off, and it would kind of cut off like a piece of bubble gum. Then instead of smearing like a liquid, it would be like half hardened, and it wouldn't smear or be sticky anymore. And then if you wait another 20 minutes or whatever, it would just be hard. So the window, I mean, if it's really hot in the sun, it might jump and do it's a chemical reaction when you mix the two components, and that actually if it progresses to its maximum, it can actually, the epoxy can get hot. They call it exothermic reaction, releases heat. And so if it's a hot day, it could set in 15 minutes or 20 minutes sometimes. I have quick set epoxies that I use in some situations that would be almost spontaneous. But I don't want that here because I can't align it, clean the joints up nice. And so we want working time, so we have the flexibility to make sure it joined well, we like it. Even if this was a big disaster and something went wrong, we could take it apart still. I will say this kind of adhesive, we can't clean this when it's in a liquid state with anything but a solvent. So in other words, if it smears on the stone, you could try to wipe it off, but it's not going to come off unless you use a solvent. Solvent like acetone does not hurt stone. So that's about it on a basic repair like this. I could show you.
Remind us what epoxies those are and what your ratio was again?
All of the Akimi products, which is what we used here, mixed with a 2-to-1 ratio. And so if you buy this, you get both of these tubes. You can't buy one of them. This is metric because it's German. It's 300 grams, 150 grams. This can be mixed by weight or volume. It actually says that on the directions. Other products that have high ratios, like a 50-to-1, like a Bondo or fiberglass, those generally don't make good repairs on materials like this. So I'm going to show you two more things quickly. I have a tiny bit of excess here. It's not enough to use on anything. And what I'm going to do is show you that we can color it, and then I'm going to make a colored infill material. Since we're working on brown, let's just try the brown.
Do you only ever clamp on one side? Is there ever an occasion where you need to clamp on both sides?
We can certainly clamp both sides, but one side is all we need. If it's shifting or sliding, if the stone is an angular break, like on slate, slate always breaks at an odd angle because of the geology of the stone. The sedimentary planes are opposing the metamorphosized planes, and so it's always angular. It always wants to slide, and so on a situation like that, you would definitely be clamping both sides. Okay. So it's just for convenience. One side is all you need for safety, and so no one can accidentally lean on it and knock it over. So what I'm going to do is I'll just do it on a clean spoon to demonstrate. I got some brown here. I'm going to show you how powerful this is. I'm going to do just a little dot of this on the end of the spoon. It's hard to demonstrate like this, but it's like a dirty spoon. It's like barely anything on it, okay? This is going to be enough to change all this epoxy, believe it or not, because the pigment is quite strong. And so I'm going to come in here and mix it all together. Again, this is just a little bit of leftovers we have here. Normally would just be garbage, and that we're turning it into a brown adhesive.
Who accepts liability for what you're doing? The person who's doing it?
doing it, or the
don't-
organization that you
I don't understand the
represent?
question. Liability
so
for
my
what?
question is, what if a person, I'll use myself as an example, I come here, I learn from you, I watch you, I look at your videos, I go to repair a stone, and I mess it up terribly. Obviously, I'm not a good student. I wasn't.
That's got
really
nothing to do
listening.
with me. So generally liability insurance would be if somebody got hurt at the site. You're talking about someone suing you for poor quality work, which is not exactly typical liability insurance. So obviously if you're getting hired to do work, you should have experience and you would need your own insurance, and then you would have liability insurance in order to get hired. If you're volunteering, it's a different story. People are probably going to be much more flexible and understanding if you're a volunteer and they're allowing volunteers as a friends group to do work. So I just mixed this and turned this into a brown. It's actually not too far off. That was like with the tiniest bit of the pigment added, as they call it, colorant. So I'll just do one other thing, and this stone is not marble, so I would use, ideally, if I was trying to use this on here, a silica sand as opposed to a marble sand, but I'm just going to demonstrate how I could make an infill material with an aggregate. We could use a different aggregate, and we could create this. So I'm going to bulk this out now. And of course with the white it'll tend to lighten it out a little, but we could compensate with more pigment, and I'm just trying to demonstrate the process.
It's a huge amount of sand for just that little bit
Correct.
of epoxy. Wow.
Very that's exactly why I'm demonstrating it. It will, and we're going to bulk it up to the point that we could probably add about 80% aggregate to it. And we could do this with a fine silica sand, and if we got a sand that was a darker color, more similar to the stone, that would be even better. And again, I was not planning on using, to be clear, I wasn't planning to use this on this area here, because this is a little coarse and it's also marble, and I would usually do this on marble. And so I can actually pick this up now, and that's what I'm trying to demonstrate. And so that with that little bit of leftover, kind of show the fact that we can color it, and then we can also bulk it out like this, and then we could apply this to something and it'll harden up. And so that was all I was trying to show. And it still will take a lot more, just to prove the point, how much it'll take. It's still very sticky right now.
How long would that take to set up?
Pretty much the same time, probably an hour about in this weather.
Might be good for fixing chips. And
Yes,
yeah,
very much.
I run into that.
In granite, like
So
in
this
your,
would really be
in
the
your
same
countertop?
process to fix if you screw up the lettering on a stone, like a modern monument, and they would be using the same color as the granite and a fine granite dust, and then the only amount, the colorant would just be a tiny bit to get the color even closer. If you're patching like a granite, an unpolished granite, if you have the exact color granite aggregate and you add it, it'll end up being darker, it'll look like a polished granite, and so then I use the white pigment and back the color back off, and you could do almost seamless color matching. You will always be able to see the difference in a patch versus the original stone when it gets wet. The water will always make it change at different rates, and that'll call attention to the repair area. So that's about it on this. I was just trying to demo this stuff. Any questions?
So to use that, you would just like find a hole and shove it in with your fingers or whatever? And
I would not use my fingers generally, and no, not really. I would be using a small tool like this, actually even smaller a lot of times. This is a 1/4 inch, and a lot of time I use the smallest tuck. This is a tuck pointer. These are both tuck pointers. I have another bucket of tools, and there's one that's even smaller, that's 3/16. And if I was filling in this crack, I would generally just work down the line very, very carefully and not smear it at all, and just fill in the crack only. And always the sign of good repair work is, and same thing with mortar work actually on bricks, is that you don't want to smear it onto the face. You're trying to keep it defined to the crack, to the open area, just where you want to fill it. And so as minimalistic as possible. If you're going through inscription or letters, even more so. You don't want to smear it in the letters. It's better to cut it back and not have any fill in those areas, so you can maintain all of the original lettering as much as possible.
And then I guess depending on the size of the stone, maybe the size of the plant, huh?
Yeah, I mean, generally I'm doing this on tablet stones, which are thinner. These are the stones that tend to break and usually do this kind of repair. So usually smaller clamps, but yes, we do have bigger clamps. I do have bigger 18-inch clamps I use sometimes. But on the smaller tablets, like the 2-inch thick marble right beside you, those are, they call slab stock. Those vary from about 1 3/4 to 2 1/4. And then the thinner sandstones, they might be more like 2.5 to 3 inches most commonly. All you need is a bar clamp like this size, which is less expensive and easier to handle. And so this is all that's required.
If we, now that we've seen you do it, we decide to go ahead and start fixing stones, can we just, if we have like the graveyard's permission, do we need any certification or anything, or we just go ahead and do it?
There is no certification, there's just training. It's really imperative for the, you know, as they say, buyer beware, that you do your research and the person you hire has experience, and that also in talking with them you feel comfortable with their understanding of the subject. And you could also hire someone and say, we want to see 1 or 2 stones done before we upscale this, and that would be like you know, that's done sometimes also, like to have a working model that says, yeah, we're happy with the results here. Now we're going to scale this up and hire you for X number of dollars to do, you know, 25 stones or whatever the situation is. So anyway, that's.
I have a question on the break. So if it's not a perfect fit like that, maybe there's like a chunk missing, do we just do that epoxy like we had and then use that infill?
We first get the joint as close as we can, just like we did, aligned, clamped, let it all cure, and then, or while it's curing, if we have, you know, the ability, we can then create a material like that and fill it in. And so we could use that very material right there if it was a good match, and we could do that in real time. We wouldn't have to wait. We wouldn't have to wait for this joint to cure if we had a material like that we were going to use. If we were going to use a mortar-based material, we would have to wait for this totally to cure and do that as a separate process. And so there's different ways you can do infill depending on the stone, depending on the person's, you know, ideology, depending on a lot of factors. And so there's not one answer to a lot of questions. There's a lot of options. Yeah.
I had a quick question about infill, especially with the sandstone. So I understand like the process of filling cracks, but if there's holes, which are usually associated with some like flaking of the layers of the stone, could you still infill those areas?
It would be the same process, really.
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted to do infill doesn't mean one thing, and so yeah, it could be a lot of things. One place I wouldn't use epoxy or recommend it is on delaminated stones where there's a big void like that, because the stone is really porous and the epoxy is hard, and that's a situation when you should have vapor permeability. So I would go toward more of a breathable mortar or grout or something to do bigger fill areas on a sandstone.
Some smaller areas would be okay with the epoxy though?
Correct, in my opinion. But again, you get different opinions on some subjects, and so not everyone is going to agree on anything, and that's why you could read different things. But I will say what I do is in line with a lot of other people like Jason Church, Rusty Brenner working out of Texas. All we have to do is get to the bottom of the base. So this works well. In many situations, we can just lever this side up. We can't lower that side, but we can quickly level it. It always could be reworked later because we're just going to pack gravel under it, so there's really no downside.
Aren't you afraid the stone will topple?
I'm never afraid of anything.
I've
gotten over all fear.
A hero.
But I don't really have fear, but I'm certainly not afraid of that. So it's a process, and it's just a basic physics, and so it's about how you conduct the process. Blocks, which are right here, and I will. Yeah, that gravel would be great. You could roll that in right there. Just watch it, Courtney, if you could. So all we need is blocks and a bar. So the one tool you need is a bar like this, which is not easy to find, and this is not just a straight bar, and it's not just crummy steel, okay? I used to have a source for good bars made in America, and from Bond Tool out of Pittsburgh, they were subcontracting the metalwork. They a couple of years ago, they sent me a pallet of absolute junk from overseas. I sent it back to them. I told them I wouldn't accept it. So I found these bars. Unfortunately, they're coming from Germany, but we have other, some American companies are making okay tools, but not like this. This bar has been made the same way since 1885. It weighs about 18 pounds. What we need is a bent end here, And what we're gonna do is go under the stone and then put a block here. This steel is so strong we could put a pipe on the end, extend it. This is about 5 feet, it's 150 centimeters. We also have 175 and 200 centimeters, and we have all those in stock. So I'm gonna go under here like this, okay? So, that's just fine, you're not gonna see that. And we're gonna go like this, okay, and get a good bite on it. So the block's a little big, so just bear with me. So I'm gonna go to a smaller block. Okay, and then all I'm gonna do is lever it like, just hold on a second, Okay. It's just breaking up some edge of the brick. The bar is very hot from being in the sun. All right, see how it tips? Okay, so just hold on a second, just bear with me.
Move to your left a little bit though, to square.
Nah, I'm not worried about that. We can fix that after. That's alignment. That's a separate thing.
Is there a problem with him pulling or pushing on that? Could that break?
What's that?
If he was pulling really hard, could that break?
I wouldn't want it to be pulled on at all. You don't have to touch it up there, but if you want to, it makes you feel better. I've done thousands of stuff. Never had a problem. Okay, so I can do this alone easily. I work on alone on a lot of projects. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come behind the bar like this. I'm going to put pressure on it like this. I go a low angle, that frees up my hands. Then I pack. Now most people when they compact things are going to be standing. They're going to be at a high angle, but we want a low angle. It helps to use the corner of the shovel. So it's still not plumb now, but I already made it a lot better.
Your level's right behind that.
I'm just going to pound it in a little harder. And right now, it's not something you want to massage. I see some people coming in with a hand trowel. No, this is like you're going against the school bully here, and you're really, you're sending it home, okay? The idea is to fill that void, compact it as hard as you can, and also what'll help is water. And so if we take some water, assuming this is water, yeah it is.
You need some too.
Thank you. This will help compact it. On a stone like this, we could level the front or the back. Still leaning a lot. Okay, so we can shovel some more in. If someone wants to help shovel, we can.
Is there some kind of foundation under that?
What's that?
Is there some kind of foundation?
There's
under
brick.
There's
I see brick on one side. It's settled.
Okay.
There's a lot of different ways you could do. You could take something apart and you could make a new foundation, but that's going to be actually much more dangerous to the stone, especially an eroded stone like this. Because the more you handle it, that's good. The more you handle it, the more likely you can put that back in there. The more you're going to have possible issues. Okay, so I'll go again and again just to show you how I do this alone. Just put pressure on it. Someone else can hold the level. You want to plumb it? Go ahead. You can plumb it from the back. Just go straight up and down. Yep. And tell me when it's plumb. Is that good? Or you need more on it? Tell me when. Okay. Okay, how's that? Just about perfect. We can check side to side now down here. So it actually shows it should come up on this side a little. So we can go ahead and finish that. In order to do that, we have to, there's not much room back there. We could raise it a tiny bit. But again, that's more cosmetic because it's right on brick here. Might be better just leave it the way it is at that slight lean. It's going to be more stable. I see a big void under there. But I'll raise that side a tiny bit to show you the principle. We'll just take a little bit of this out. Okay, so I'll go a little further. Low angle, try to fully compact it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is come around to this side. I'm going to pull the blocks out.
I don't know. I have no idea.
Going to come over here.
It was pretty bad.
What's that?
It was hotter, but she asked if it was hotter yesterday.
Today when we was bad yesterday.
Okay, so I want to get a good bite underneath. Get the blocks close to the fulcrum point, like that. Okay, I'm going to set this up a little better now. I'm trying to raise it. Actually, from here, I'll add the fine stuff. So I'll just sprinkle some of this here. Yeah, there's holes in both sides because I did that. So it's all good. We'll clean it up after.
What life is all about.
Okay, so I'll raise this side a little now.
Oh.
It's pretty easy.
This
I
is
got the right bar. You know, if you got one of those bars.
Okay, let's see what we got here. That's
It's like doable.
it's just about there. This side is still perfect, so I'm going to go just a tiny bit more. Then I'll go for a little more compaction after that. And then after, we'll take a look at alignment. We'll talk about alignment. Okay, so go up a little more. Like this. Low angle, corner of the shovel. Good compaction. Fill the void in. Get it to come back at you. See the way the gravel's disappearing in the hole? Come from this side a little. It's a little tight area here. Yeah. Originally, these stones weren't here. Okay, these are footstones. These were moved here almost definitely. They were probably out here somewhere, but usually they wouldn't be so tight. Okay, we're looking pretty good. Let's take a look at the row now. You want to look down the line and see what you see. So,
That side needs to go.
so we could sight it from either end. You want to take a walk back and look down the overall contour of the row. It looks like
Oh, that all, both ways.
looks like
Go this way a little.
this end should come forward a little.
He's gonna move it, hold it, yeah.
Okay, that's one way of doing it. So we want to just sight the overall row, which is like this, and we can say what you were doing is exactly accurate, and it's got to come this way a little. So I'll show you a couple different ways we can move it. One way is we take a block. We use the same bar. Now we're going to use the point end. Okay, we're going to come to this side, and we're going to do a good solid plant. Angle the block a little bit. We'll want to go low with it. Angle the bar a little. Now we can push it.
Look at that.
Magic!
Okay, how much do you need? A little bit more. We're just going to sight it, and we're going to try to blend it into the overall contours of the cemetery as a whole. And so right now, from here, it looks like I went a little too much, but it's not that significant. But so it's variable depending on where you sight it from. And so from this side, it looks better. Looks like it's still probably a little too much, but it's close enough anyway. So we could go back and just check one last time and see if we had any effect on it. And here, it actually did drop a tiny bit, so we'll fine tune that. This way maintained. Okay, so I'm just gonna do one last tip to go bring it back to level, and then we can do a final compaction and regrading, and it's all done.
When you were doing it this way, you said you wanted a little bit above.
I mean, you could go a tiny bit. I'm talking like, just on the other side of the. But yeah, you could do that a little. I mean, I go pretty much on level, but I might go just a tiny bit past. Not much.
And kind of just to overcompensate.
Yeah, depending on the situation. So, but yeah, that is an option. Because I'm fine tuning it now, I'm going to use the fine stuff on top. Fine tuning, fine gravel. Okay, I'll probably put that in there. Then I'll come in one more time here, put a block in, close to the fulcrum point, get the block nice and low, and I want to show, someone come over here and feel how easy this is to move. Just push down gently on the bar, anybody. You'll see that anyone could do this work. See?
Oh, jeez.
See?
Be careful.
Okay, so go ahead and push down. Well, do
it again.
Do it again. I just need a little bit. Just push down. That's good right there. Perfect.
Keep it there.
Hold it
Keep
right
it
there.
there.
Is that heavy?
No.
Okay, see, I told you you could do it. Okay, low angle with the shovel. Corner of the shovel, I get better compaction. Generally, a spade shovel works best for this. Get really good compaction. The more the better, because then it will fill the void in and it won't allow organic matter to wash in and easily move it. This could eventually move again because, it's on gravel, but for the time being, okay, that's good. Thank you. For the foreseeable future, it's going to be a good
How
set.
many shovels do you go through a year?
I don't really go through shovels.
You don't. So even though you're using the corner that hard, they
It gets rounded out. These are pretty good quality. We actually sell these. Okay, so I'm going to bring all the gravel back in first so we can hide it. We could also, I'm just looking for where.
Gotta keep things neat so the line trimmers don't kick the stones into the windows.
So I was just going to clean this off first now.
It's not the
Additionally, obviously, we didn't bond this, so we could clean this right away now. I mean, after we're done, there's no issue. On the one we did over here, we want to wait for that to cure if we were going to do cleaning work. And so, and again, that'll be in the next hour or two. Finish this up, and then we'll move on. So everyone good with that process? Try to.
We just all need the magical pry bar thing.
You know, there's a lot of different bars out there, but most of them are inferior. They actually used to sell fairly decent slate bar at many home centers, and then they seem to have discontinued it. You know, different stores have different things, so it would be smart for them to sell a bar with a bent end on. Sometimes they call it a bent angle chisel bar. They call it a slate bar. Some people just call it a crowbar, pry bar. When I was a monument setter, we used to call it a setting bar. But we actually had another tool that had that name also, but that held slings to pick up the stones. But that's what we always called it.
Magical Snap-on Man can get you those bars too.
Snap-on sells good ones?
I don't think they sell tools that big, to my knowledge, for this
They carry
application.
them on a truck, but they can order them for you.
Okay. Snap-on are very expensive, but I'm interested in any company that has tools that are high quality